Welcome to the Dr. Schuster and Oxley podcast. We're calling this The Power of Stories. The objective is to discuss and unpick how stories have such powerful meaning and can provide us with extraordinary insights. This is our pilot episode, and since it is our pilot episode, we thought we would do a quick series of introductions. I get the enormous pleasure and honor of introducing my partner in crime here, my collaborator, Dr. Helmut Schuster, who grew up in Vienna, Austria. Initially was a swimming protege, had an aspiration to go to the Olympics. Transferred to the United States to do his college education, but found that the school he went to didn't have a swimming pool. And there are some questions that we should ask him at some stage about this. But after this, he pursued a corporate career. His Olympic dream, I think, is merely on hold. I don't think it's entirely over. We'll ask him again whether he still plans to go to the Olympics.
Wishful thinking.
But he pursued a career initially at Henkel, a FMCG company where he cut his teeth on marketing. Then he went to BP and had an extraordinarily successful and remarkable career at BP, where he ended as the head of human resources. Since then, he has pursued a number of entrepreneurial ventures, not least of which was the founding of his Kira Moya luxury leisure wear brand. And he supports a number of startup investors across the world. So welcome, Dr. Helmut Schuster, co-author of the Chez Sinope series of career and professional advice books.
Dr. Oxley, Dr. David Oxley, thank you very much for your very, very kind words. I really, really appreciate it. Let me start with saying that David and I have been working together for a long time. I think it's more than 15 years now. And before we had that very, very random idea of writing books, in many ways the crazy idea of writing books, basically, which maybe is not as crazy, because I think what we have in common, what we discovered very soon, both David and I like reading. I think our combined basically library is probably the largest library on the planet by now. And we enjoy like leadership books, but we also do like fiction. So who is David? Who is this Mr. David Oxley, Dr. David Oxley? Let me start like most and foremost, I think he's a very, very loving husband. And I really, really enjoy his basically the way he treats his wife and the way they work together as a team. I think that's amazing. But he's also father of three wonderful young ladies. And I think a bit more recently, he also become a grandfather. And I think that I find that very, very wonderful, really. Most importantly, he has a wicked sense of humor. And some people, it's like a bit like Marmite. Some people love it. Some people don't like it as much. I love it. Yeah. But I guess you will find it out over the course of the programs when his humor kicks in. Career-wise, I always associated David actually far more with trading than HR, which is really funny because most of his time is spent in talent or transformation or big projects. He started out at Ernst & Young, but soon after, I think, you realized partner in a consultant is not as exciting as being a trader. And that's why I associated with trading. You joined Enron in London, worked there for 4 years. I think he learned a lot. It was a great development. Shortly after Enron, there was the luck I met, actually, we got to know each other in BP. David joined the trading floor in BP in HR capacity. And it was then probably for me something which was probably the most trusted business relationship I ever had started. And I really appreciate that. David's superpower really is to say yes, I realized, to take risk. It took probably 24 hours or even less to basically move his wife and himself to Mumbai for a year, which turned out to be 4 years ultimately, in basically transforming, helping Mukesh Ambani, the second generation owner of Reliance Industry, to transform the company. He left a legacy, and then shortly after 4 years in Mumbai, he decided to go to Abu Dhabi to support ADNOC and Dr. Sultan in their transformation. And he left a big legacy at both companies. We retired probably at the same time, and that's when the crazy idea, now the wonderful idea of writing books, occurred over breakfast and blueberries and croissant. And today, I think what we're going to talk about and what we picked out today is one story of book 2, The Groundhog Career, a story we both like very much. And David, I think it's over to you to tell this story. And we're going to discuss our different perspectives, or same perspectives on the story over the course of this program. David.
I'm embarrassed. That's far too generous an introduction. But I'm not that embarrassed, actually. Thank you.
You never are.
So this podcast is about stories, and the reason that we've centered the podcast on stories is that all too often professional life is a series of instructions, orders, things to learn, being told how to do things. Business books very often are instruction manuals. This is how you do it. Over the time that we have been in the professional world, we think that storytelling is underrated in its power. It gives extraordinary color, and there's this adage that when you're told something, you only retain about 70% the day that you're told it, and then the next day it drops down to 20%, and basically it's zero after a week. But a story is something that you carry with you for decades, and actually its meaning can sometimes evolve. And this is central to our writing. When we do our writing projects in both a Career Carol and a Groundhog Career, they're centered first on a story that has a meaning to it, but it has a meaning depending on who the reader is. So it will mean different things to different people, and that's intentional. The idea of providing something that has layers to it. So each time we do one of these podcasts, the objective is to have either us or a guest discuss a story that means something to them, something that they've either been told or they've read or somehow they're intrigued by, and then we'll deconstruct it a little bit. So today, as Helmut mentioned, we're going to share the story, or one of the many little stories that we had in a Groundhog Career. And this is a story that is shared by a character called Uncle Freddy. And Uncle Freddy is written into the book as a character who is a psychology professor. He is recently retired, but he continues to have former students that consult with him. And in a way, it's a little bit of a role model for Helmut and I. Over the years, we have had faculty, academic friends that have been our instructors, that we've sort of carried those relationships with us over many, many decades, and still go back to them occasionally for what we see as sage advice. And one or two of them have this intriguing habit of, rather than answering a question, they tell us a story. And this is a riff a little bit on one of those stories that we were once told. So I will read this and then we'll deconstruct it. Okay, so Shay Sinnock being the main character in A Groundhog Career. Before you're called back to eat some cake, Shay is celebrating his birthday. Let me tell you a very quick story. I'd like you to reflect on it. You're still doing the weekly introspections, the idea of each week thinking about what's going on in your life. Shay nodded. Uncle Freddy went on. If you see no meaning in it, discard it. If, however, it provides you with comfort and insight, use it. Uncle Freddy smiled. Some years ago, I invited some of my former students to my home to hear about how they were doing. Around a dozen visited that evening. Several worked in banking, some in consulting, a couple had built their very own technology firms. They all told me how amazing they were doing. They inferred that they had made lots of money, lived in lovely homes, travelled to exotic places. I told them it was tradition for me on these occasions to serve them all the best coffee I could make. I diligently made the best coffee I could. As you know, I'm something of a connoisseur, so I spent time selecting the right beans, grinding them just perfectly, And the water, which is so often overlooked, was the best filtered distilled water I could find. I then carefully selected a dozen assorted cups and mugs. They were different sizes, some new, some old, some plain, some decorated with colourful patterns. When I returned, I asked them to help themselves. I watched carefully as they jockeyed to get the shiniest and best looking cups. There was some discussion about the cups and even a bit of bragging by those who felt that they had nabbed the best ones. I waited for a quell in the conversation as they began sipping the coffee. Then I said, "How many of you are aware or conscious of the value you placed on the cups? Since they are all equally capable of delivering my excellent coffee to your mouths, do not alter its taste in any way. It's interesting that you have all placed such importance on the cups. Let me ask you all, do you view your worlds, your lives, your personal identities by the cups that you drink from, or the quality of their contents?" Okay, that's the story. We should give it a round of applause.
Yes, we should.
So stories like this are lovely because they're relatively short and they have an entertaining value to them. Or at least to us, they draw us in. So let's start. We're going to ask ourselves 3 questions here, and we're just going to discuss it, an open conversation between Helmut and I. So first of all, what's the story literally about? What's actually going on in this story? Helmut, what's your takeaway?
Yeah, well, basically, obviously, there's a deeper level, obviously, Uncle Freddy, but at the end of the day, he wants to meet his students. It's a very, very good occasion, and as you can take from the book, is basically they're all a bit bragging a bit. I mean, they all are like at that age where they're early in the career, where they basically show off like how much money they earn or what they do, how important they are. And I think this is something which basically is probably as well. His work on his career, he thinks he's figured it all out. And the interesting thing is in this stories, they all look at the mug. Yeah, nobody really just focuses too much on the coffee. I don't even know how much they realize that Uncle Freddy is really an expert coffee maker. Yeah, and I do appreciate it very much, the story, because I'm from Austria. Coffee is very, very important. But so basically, it's just observing how a group of people work on their careers. The thing that matters most to them is basically the cup. So it's the way things look. It's basically the shiny thing, yeah? And obviously, nobody at that point in time really appreciates the quality of this amazing coffee. And I think I can a bit relate to that, because sometimes when I go and buy wine, yeah, sometimes I look at the label of the wine, I figure, oh, this must be good wine, yeah? And then I realize it's like $3, and I figure, oh, maybe it's not good wine, yeah? So we all do that sometimes. We all do that. And this is for me the obvious story. But obviously the story has many, many layers to it. David, what is your take on the story?
Well, what I like about the setting, and obviously hands up, I'm a bit biased here because I had a hand in writing it. But what I like about it is this authority figure of Uncle Freddy, who is this elder statesman professor. And again, I liken it to people I know in real life, that that there is a certain reverence to these people. They are established, very well renowned. In this instance, what we're juxtapositioning is Uncle Freddy as this very accomplished, very senior, very perhaps almost famous psychology professor who's gone into the kitchen to make coffee for his students. And in a way, I think this is a sort of role reversal, the authority figure going and serving and waiting on their students. And I like aspects of that. I like the idea of jockeying around the authority position. So I like ultimately that the story is about the authority figure, the elder statesman, serving the next generation. So there's a thread here that switches around student and, if you will, master, or at least teacher, and then the teacher switching around and serving the students. And that also, in a way, I suppose, is how we think about knowledge, how knowledge is passed from one generation to another. And so I like that parallel in the story. it also plays with the coffee thread, which we love, right? So Helmut and I are massive coffee fans. And in fact, Helmut still does have an interest in some coffee stores in London called Kipfal. So that love of coffee, that love of having a drink and discussing something openly, and how that sort of seems to just take barriers down. It seems to reduce obstacles to having a free conversation, to take something that might be, you imagine people arriving at a house with a little bit of anxiety perhaps, and you serve them a cup of coffee and somehow those anxiety levels reduce and you become just humans. I like that.
I mean, for me, the interesting thing is about, like, when you think about he's this authority, this really wise man, they all look up to him, and still, yeah, they have no shame in boasting and showing things off and basically being very superficial. But this is so true. When I meet some of the youngish people in BP who used to work for me, when they get together in a social occasion, they still behave like 19-year-olds or 20-year-old students. And I think this is lovingly, that's charming, yeah. But I do believe I would be very much surprised if these students invited don't have far more depth. Yeah, and I think that's one thing which is very important for me now. Books. Yeah, people like sometimes to stay at the surface. Yeah, they don't dare to explore deeper levels, and that's what we explore in our books. The different layers of relationship and just basically expose yourself and your weaknesses. And that's what I like so much about this story, because it relates very much to where Shay is in his current career. I mean, Uncle Freddy very much reminds me of one of my professors. He's now president of Austria, Alex van der Bellen. Basically, he had this reputation that no matter how many books you read, how many names you dropped in his the only thing you want to know whether you could think independently. So independent thinking was the key thing. And he reminds me very much, Uncle Freddy very much reminds me of him. This wise man basically tries to teach in very subtle ways. So I like that very much.
So if we then dig beneath the surface, what's the underpinning themes here? So there's definitely an underpinning theme about substance and form. So the form takes the place of the cups, and the substance is the coffee. So the metaphor here, I think, which is fairly clear, is are you interested in the superficiality, the form of something, what it looks like, or are you interested in the substance, the inner, deeper meaning? And so I think the context of this story is very much at the early part of A Groundhog Career, where Shay has got carried away with his career. So I think the positioning of the story is in that context, which we didn't necessarily share in the reading, but it's there at that stage. But I think you can take away a little of those threads because, of course, Uncle Freddy talks about how all the students came in and bragged about how much money they made and the cars they were driving and the houses they were living in. So it was positioned in such a way as to say that there was a lot of debate about what I've acquired, the material aspects, and what was missing was the qualitative aspects, the things that don't necessarily get easily conveyed with a number or a financial component to it. So I think that story, that sort of substance and form, what is most important to you? Are you getting one disproportionately in your mind as more important than the other, or simply focusing on one and completely ignoring the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like, part of our books, and like, as David alluded, Shay is a bit lost at this point in time. He's created this famous formula how to basically get promotion as quickly as possible and not money as possible. And this is actually ringing very true for many people in the 20s. Yeah, the first thing they want is actually they want to get a job, they want to have a prestigious job, then a job title, then a lot of money, and then acquire a car, house, whatever they desire. And much of the motivation at that age comes actually from progress which is manifested in external things. However, as our hero Shay basically realizes, that's actually not enough. Yeah. So he's very successful, but there's something missing in his life. And I think is when you talk to people in their 20s and 30s, I think that's very, very common. And I think that's what we try to explore and go into an inquiry. How can we make sure that there's a bit more balance in our life, like the yin and yang? And that's, I think, what we try to get across in this book. Yeah. But sometimes we need to have breakdowns to have breakthroughs. In our stories, we like the topic of breakthroughs, but also the need for breakdowns once in a while.
I think there's another component to the story as well, which I think is apt to our current political climate, which is that are we wrapped up in labeling things? So the idea that how something looks defines it. So we make a judgment about its appearance. And so I think there's also a component of the story that, at least to me, makes me reflect on, it's a mistake to judge people judgmentally on sort of how it looks, that the substance of what's within it is at least as important, if not more important. Now, I suppose in a way this gets into, don't judge a book by its cover, judge it by its content. But in some ways, what I'm trying to do is to make the observation that there's a lot of debate about gender, sexuality, who you love. There's sort of so-called gender politics. What I suppose in a way that you can take from the story is to say, actually, all of that all of that stuff, the appearance stuff, is somewhat superficial, that there is more of a spectrum of tastes, literally, when it comes to coffee. And not all, some people like dark roast, some people like medium roast, others like cappuccino, and goodness me, lattes, goodness, I don't know who they are. But the point being, that idea that the taste of something is at least as important as the appearance, possibly more so. And it's very easy to overlook it or start to label it and judge it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you're very right. I mean, for me, the key thing is that the looks do matter, whatever it is. It just is important, yeah. Because when you think about it, we don't like when they came in to meet Uncle Freddie, they didn't know how the coffee would taste. So the only thing they could actually judge things by is what they saw. And I think that's what I find very interesting. And I'm very happy that I'm not sure if you had this time when you still had photographs on CVs. It's amazing how I looked through all the CVs and say, okay, good, not good, not nicely dressed, no respect. It's interesting enough how we've been brainwashed through society the first 20, 25 years that we immediately apply judgment based on the way something looks. And you probably have made the same experience, and you were sitting in an interview and you had this beautifully dressed candidate, tie, jacket, whatever, yeah. And then the first sentence came out and you figured, oh my God, yeah, this person doesn't have the intellect to hold a conversation. So I think it's very, very important that we recognize that. But external appearance is always, or we use that always as a proxy for content, yeah, and it's a very bad proxy, obviously. And I think that's something we basically want to explore, yeah, because it sometimes takes some time to really get to the core, to really understand the substance, yeah. But it's like books sometimes. You have a beautiful book cover, and at page 3 you think, oh my God, I don't want to read this book, yeah. And you don't want to be forced to read like 300 pages of like a bad content. So I think it's, at the end of the day, yeah, beautiful. No, this is both. Okay, David, this is a great example of what I'm trying to say. It is basically form and substance, yeah? Form and substance.
Perfect balance.
That's the perfect thing, yeah.
So just leaving the story here, Are there any takeaways that you take from the story in the context of the book? What in A Groundhog Career, the story sets up. It's somewhat prophetic, I think, the objective being to confront Shay with a series of questions that to some extent he then explores through A Groundhog Career, which is that are you focusing on the superficial? What is the substance? Have you even explored what your substance is? Perhaps you've not really asked yourself the question, who are you really? And at least in the context of the book, the objective of the story from my perspective, and as I say, I think everyone who reads the book may come away with a somewhat different interpretation, but at least where I was trying to go with the story was to say, how do you know what you want if you haven't asked yourself the question, who are you? You know, if you're pursuing life based on how things look, on the competition around you, because in a way this jockeying for, I want this cup and look at my cup, it's better than yours, sort of sets up this sort of societal context where we tend to look as measures of success as what other people have done. And that's the sort of envy approach. I want to get something because someone else has it. And the question in a way more deeply is, but you know, you're an individual, you're unique. Have you figured out what you really like and what really inspires and fulfills you? And if you haven't done that, there's a danger that you run off chasing the shiny cup, but it's not really the one that other people think is important, but perhaps it may not be for you. You need to answer that question for yourself. So I think that for me is, in the context of the book, an important setup for the story that then unfolds. But it may have different meanings for different people. Does it have a different meaning for you?
Not really. I mean, what you said is actually exactly the way I read the book. And if there's one message I would like to basically give to the people who potentially consider reading the book, buying the book, and basically it really is, the key message is, don't live your life through other eyes or other people's expectation. Take the time. It does take time, to really figure out what is it you really like, not what is it to please your parents, to teachers, your friends. Try to figure out and be brave enough and have the courage to live your life as you want it. Yeah. And reality is, and this is also the thing which I think is explored in the book, is the first 10, 15, 20 years we have been programmed. So we have a program in our brain, basically, which is school, which is religion, if you're religious, which is our parents. And they all have interest, yeah. But at one point in time, and I think, David, you did the course as well, basically, we were taught, basically, it's your life and you've only one, yeah. And you better live it well and not to meet the other people's expectation. And if this is the one single message people get by reading our books, I would be very happy already, because it is scary. It really is scary how many people don't dare to basically live their life what they want. They want to please other people, and that's never a good life to be lived.
So that's a lovely point on which for us to move on. I think your reflections there are perfect. If you've enjoyed this discussion between the co-hosts and the co-authors of the Shay Sinope Career and Professional Advice books, there are more episodes coming. You can also follow us, our exploits, on via our website at drsschusterandoxley.com. We'll put the links in the comments section here. We're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn. But most importantly, check out our books. You might just be entertained. You might find them practical. You might find them relevant. Helmut and I are very modestly attempting to invent a new book category. Now, my suggestion for that book category is professional advice narrative tales, simply because I quite like the acronym that it is left with. Helmut, do you agree with that, or would you prefer a different
I very much agree with that. I just know that you like acronyms. Yeah, that's your hobby. But I get used to it. But now, yeah, so yeah, no, I think it's
So,
good.
thanks everyone for following. Please give us a like and a follow and a subscribe. And catch the next episode of Doctors Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories, when we will have a guest discussing and sharing their favorite story, and then we will attempt to try and extract some wisdom from it. So, with the pilot now coming to a close, let me just say it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye for me. And just one thing before you close, I think the guests we have is a very wide spectrum of people from coming from very different walks of life. And I think that was going to make the program interesting. It's corporate people, it's startup people, it's people from 30 under 30 Forbes list, it's artists, and I think we're going to mix it up. So watch what's coming. Bye.